Good Monday morning. Mark Conlock, Director of Horticulture here at Green Bay Botanical Garden. I want to talk to you a little bit about composting, why we do it, how to do it, and how to use it. I'm back here behind our children's garden in our composting area, which hopefully you know about. It's kind of off the beaten path. And actually these signs were sponsored by Starbucks, Make Your Mark volunteer program, so kind of appropriate, and also appropriate because you can compost your coffee grounds. So there you go. So compost, you've probably heard about it, maybe you know about it. It's kind of, this sign really is interesting because it does say, you take your debris, your yard waste, it's a way to sustainably use all the things that accumulate in your yard, add some water, oxygen, in the presence of these microbes, it breaks down and eventually becomes compost. So compost, why would you do it? Well, about 30% of what we throw away is actually compostable. So it's like scraps in your kitchen and things like that. They actually weigh a lot, so it's pretty crazy if you think about it. Like, think about how much landfill space we could save if we all just composted like all that debris. We would like save 30% of the space in a landfill. And also when you think about like all the stuff in your trash, and then you think about like banana peels and carrot things and everything, like when that gets put in the landfill, it is still like organic and breaks down and like produces all these juices and things and leachate at the bottom of a landfill. So it's actually kind of weird because you have this slimy yard waste in with all of like your other waste. So it's not a good thing, and it's good to keep it out of the landfill. Reduces the amount of we would pay for getting rid of our garbage. And also the compost is a really great byproduct that we can use in our garden. So what does it do? Well, it helps retain moisture in sandy soils, and it helps drainage in clayey soils. By helping retain that moisture, it also helps, stormwater runoff and reduces that. It also has nutrients and micronutrients for our plant growth. It helps the soil, and it's just an all-around good thing to add to your garden, a slow-release fertilizer that has a lot of plant-available nutrients. So how do we make this? Well, we have all of our debris that we have in our yard. So here we have a pile of some weeds that I just pulled actually from this area here. So one thing you can do is use all this weed debris that you pull out is weeds. A couple things to think about though is like, don't use weed seed in there. Like here, we would not want to have those seeds in there, and don't use invasive plant species that might be able to propagate by their different vegetative parts. And don't use really diseased foliage, because a lot of times that stuff, you can't get your compost pile hot enough to kill the weed seeds or the disease. If you really actively manage it, you might be able to, but start slow and learn what you're doing, and then you could eventually think about adding that stuff in, or bring that stuff to a place like a city compost pile that's a lot more actively managed, and they monitor the temperature better to make sure they kill all that stuff. So they call this the greens when you read about composting, because it's green, literally. And then another thing you can do is save, like banana peels, parts of fruits and vegetables and things like that you don't eat. We have like a little ice cream pail back in our horticulture area actually where everybody puts theirs, and then we can just add it to this compost pile. And those again are greens. So some other things you can compost are actually right here, like there's the greens that are the fruit and vegetable scraps and the weeds. Then there's the browns, which are leaves, say woody plant prunings that are maybe just a ½ inch diameter. And those browns you need to have in there too, because if the greens are just there, they'll be really wet and they'll not compost really well. So if you actively manage a pile, you want to have about 2 parts of the browns, the leaves, to 1 part of the greens. If you're just kind of like doing a static pile where you're just letting it go, you can kind of like mix it all together, maybe 1 to 1. But 2 to 1, 2 browns to 1 green is the standard ratio. You can even put your newspaper, when you learn about composting, boom, you can compost this newspaper and this little brochure from the DNR for more information. The DNR has this really cool publication, and this Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article just from a couple weeks ago has some really great information too. And of course Brown County, I'm sure, has some great information, as well as where I used to work, Waukesha County, we did a whole yard waste recycling program, so check that out. So another quick thing about this. What I like to do then is add a little bit of the compost that was already done, or you can just add dirt in there, and that's what gives you what you need. You don't need to buy like a special compost conditioner or anything like that. These broken down parts of the compost or soil will have the microorganisms and all those things we saw. And you can kind of do like a lasagna method where you do green, brown, a little layer of soil, and let that go as your first stage. The other thing you got to think about is, remember, there's a lot of oxygen pore spaces in there, but it does need to be wet to activate everything, because a lot of those microorganisms kind of like float around in the soil water layer. So you want to give it some water. I don't have actually water here, but think about watering your compost pile when you water your plants if you don't get enough moisture.
I mean, Mark, it is starting to rain, so we're gonna have water covered.
It's gonna rain on us, and God is helping us compost. So you want this kind of like as wet as like a wrung out sponge. So not super wet, because that'll have anaerobic conditions and you'll get different bacteria that you don't want, and that's what causes the smell and things like that. So then this 3-bin composter, you would put all that debris in there and let it break down a bit. And then the thing that you need to do to get the oxygen is to mix it up. And that's like another hard working part of it that sometimes people don't want to do. And that's where you would just have your pile that you would leave, and it would take you maybe 1 year to 1.5 years to break down. But if you actively manage it, you know, you can get it to break down faster than that, and say maybe 3-4 months, or you know, a little longer depending on how much you turn it. So the thing you need to do is actually turn that pile once it breaks down, and that helps get more oxygen into it as you mix it all up too, and gets different parts into the middle of the pile. So the 3-bin compost system works good, because what you do is you pitchfork it over to the next stage here and mix it up and give it water if it needs it, and then you finish it off in like the last stage. Anything else I want to say about that? Just remember the size of your pile. It should be at least 3 by 3 by 3 to give you enough volume to be able to get the warmer temperatures in the middle there. If you have something that's like a big pile that spreads out, those outside edges won't have enough material to get to be the right temperature, and that's where you get the problems with the weed seeds and the disease not being killed. So it can be I won't say hard, as active as you want it to be, or as passive as you want it to be, depending on, you know, when you want that compost. Or, I mean, it's a good thing to compost, but if you don't get enough fast enough, you can always buy some compost. There's Purple Cow activated compost. There's a compost from the city of Green Bay that you can go to the yard waste recycling facilities to get. So you can also supplement your own crop of compost with those things. So now, remember we talked about what you can do with the compost? Well, a couple things. One thing is, remember, it's really good for your garden beds. So when you're creating a new garden bed, or maybe the beginning of your vegetable growing season, you want to put about 3 inches of compost. So you can see it's actually a pretty thick layer to get to 3 inches. It's like, boom, that much. Or some of the little brochures say 3 to 6 inches of compost, so it could be even more. And what we usually do is, like, when we have new beds here at the garden, we rototill that 3 inches of compost into the, you know, first say 9 or 12 inches of soil. Or if you have a smaller area, you can use, you know, the garden fork to kind of like incorporate it into the ground and get it in there where it's going to be in the root zone for the plants. So that's how you would use it in like a large garden bed. If you want to use just a little bit in a container planting, this is Purple Cow activated compost, so we would just like top dress our pot with a little bit of that stuff, and it would slowly break down over time in the growing season. The other thing you can do, if it's really dry, like this got a little wet from the rains last night, but if it's really dry, you can put it into a spreader like this and actually use it as an organic supplement to your turf grass. So that's something we haven't done, but that I'd like to have us try maybe on some of our areas in the woodland gardens there, or the no-mow grass mix areas. The other thing I didn't talk about a ton, but you can also, once you really get into composting, use a worm bin. So that would be something that has to be kind of kept at the right temperature range, about 55 degrees to 84 degrees. Something you can like keep in your house even, like in the winter months. And you need the bedding for the worms, you need the right worms, the red wigglers, and then you can put your debris in there. And kind of here, it goes from layer to layer. As the worms start to eat this, you know, they come up and eat it, and then they finish it, and then they go to the next layer where you have more bedding. And eventually, you get to the finished worm casting product, which again you can use, you know, in your containers as an amendment, or into your bed or your vegetable garden. And then at the bottom part of this one, I don't show it here, but we have kind of like where all the water goes. So that's like the worm casting juices that you can use to water your plants with. So you can also, you know, use that in your gardening or to water your plants. So those are just a couple ideas about why you'd want to compost, how to compost, and what you can use your compost for. For more information, check out our website, gbbg.org, or our Facebook page.